The cold steel of the barrel pressed into the soft skin just behind Mia's ear, a freezing punctuation mark at the end of a 2-year sentence. The scent of gunpowder and rain-soaked wool replaced the usual fragrance of the lilies and hydrangeas that filled her small shop. Her hands remained buried in a bucket of ice-cold water, her fingers gripping a bunch of white roses so hard the thorns pierced her skin. Red plumes bloomed in the water, swirling around her knuckles like ink. She didn't flinch. She didn't even breathe. The tea was oolong Dante. Steeped for exactly 4 minutes. "I never missed a detail," Mia said. Her voice was a flat, dry rasp. She didn't turn around. She stared at her own reflection in the window, a ghost-like shimmer against the backdrop of the Seoul rain. Behind her, the reflection of Dante was a towering shadow, his face obscured by the angle of the light. "Except the one where I knew who you were before you even signed the lease?" Dante's voice rasped. It was a low, guttural vibration that made the glass vases on the counter hum. He tossed a weathered leather folder onto the wet tile. It skidded across the floor, the sound of leather on ceramic like a sharp intake of breath, stopping at her feet. A single photograph slid out, Mia 2 years younger in a crisp police academy uniform. In the photo, her jaw was set with a conviction she no longer recognized. Her eyes back then were full of a light that had long since been extinguished by the gray mornings and the blood-stained ledgers of the syndicate. This was the cost of 730 days of silence. This was the moment the mask shattered. Mia pulled her hands from the bucket. The water dripped from her fingertips, icy and pink. She turned slowly, her palms open, showing him the punctures from the thorns. Her heart felt like a heavy stone, dragging her down into the floorboards. Dante stood 3 feet away. His black wool coat shimmered with a fine mist of drizzle. His jaw was a hard line of carved granite, his eyes 2 dark pits of unresolved questions. He didn't look like the man who had spent every Tuesday morning for 2 years discussing the lifespan of peonies with her. He didn't look like the man who had once touched a bruised petal with a tenderness that made her throat ache. He looked like the ghost of the Seoul underworld, a man who had built a kingdom on silence and steel. "You did your job well," Dante said. He lowered the gun an inch, his gaze tracking the frantic pulse in the hollow of her throat. "The ledger is gone. My men are being pulled out of their beds by your colleagues as we speak. The empire is bleeding." "I did what I was trained to do," Mia replied. She stepped over the folder, her boots squelching on the wet floor. "But you're wrong about the ledger." Dante's grip on the pistol tightened until his knuckles turned the color of bone. A vein in his temple throbbed, a rhythmic ticking clock. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not when the air smells like the end of the world." Mia reached into the hidden pocket of her apron, her movements slow and deliberate. She pulled out a small charred piece of plastic. The digital encryption key was a melted, grotesque lump of silicon. "I burned it last night. The police have names, Dante. They have low-level enforcers and paper trails that lead to dead ends. But they don't have the accounts. Nobody gets the money. Not the syndicate and not the government." Dante stared at the useless plastic in her hand. The air in the shop felt like it was being sucked out through the cracks in the ceiling. He looked at the melted key, then back at her face, searching for a trace of the woman he thought he knew. "Why?" he whispered. "Because as long as that money existed, you were a target," Mia said. Her voice finally wavered, a hairline fracture in the stone. "And as long as I was a cop, I was the one who had to pull the trigger. If the money is gone, the mission is dead. Now we're both nothing." The sound of sirens erupted in the distance, a rising, discordant wail that tore through the rain. Blue and red lights flickered against the shop window, turning the flowers into shifting, bloody shadows. Black SUVs screeched to a halt outside, their tires screaming on the asphalt. Dante shoved the pistol into his waistband. He grabbed Mia's wrist, his grip crushing, his skin hot against her ice-cold flesh. "You burned my world down, Mia. The least you can do is help me find a new one." He pulled her toward the back of the shop, toward the heavy steel door of the industrial refrigerator. Mia stumbled, her heels clicking on the tile. She looked back at the front window one last time. The police were already breaching the door, the glass shattering like diamonds as the battering rams swung through. Dante kicked open a hidden hatch in the floor of the cooler, a dark, concrete throat waiting below. It smelled of old copper, damp earth, and the metallic tang of a world without sunlight. "For minutes," Dante said, checking his watch. "The subway line runs beneath this block. If we miss the 502, we're dead." Mia looked into the dark, then back at the man who had been her mark, her target, and her only companion for 2 years. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask what happened if they were caught. She simply stepped into the dark, the hatch slamming shut above them just as the first flashbang detonated in the shop, turning the world above into a blinding, white scream. The tunnel was a narrow ribcage of stone and sweating pipes, a subterranean artery that bled into the heart of the city. They ran in a rhythmic blur of footsteps and heavy, echoing breathing. Dante led the way, his hand never leaving Mia's wrist. The heat from his palm was the only thing keeping her grounded as they waded through ankle-deep water that smelled of rust and urban decay. Every drip of water from the ceiling sounded like a hammer on an anvil. "They'll check the tunnels," Mia panted. Her lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. Each breath was a struggle against the heavy, stagnant air. "My captain knows about this route. He used it during the 2024 raids." "Your captain is on my payroll, Mia," Dante said without looking back. His voice was a low growl that bounced off the damp walls. "That's how I knew about the file. That's how I knew your real name before you even walked into the shop to ask about the rent." Mia stopped dead. Her feet skidded in the muck and she yanked her arm back, forcing Dante to turn. The tunnel was lit only by the faint, pulsing orange glow of a distant emergency light, casting long, distorted shadows that looked like grasping hands. "He sold me out?" Dante stepped closer, his presence a physical weight in the narrow space. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, a predator in his natural habitat. "He sold you the moment you walked into his office. You weren't there to take me down, Mia. You were there to keep me distracted. While you were playing florist, he was moving his own people into the syndicate's territory. You were the smoke and I was the mirror." Mia's hands started to shake uncontrollably. The 2 years she had spent, the late nights, the constant fear of discovery, the crushing isolation, it hadn't been for justice. It hadn't been for the city. It had been for a different kind of greed, a more sophisticated betrayal. "I protected you," she whispered. "I diverted 3 different hits on your life. I lied to my handlers to keep you out of the line of fire. And I let you," Dante replied. He reached out, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw, his touch almost a ghost of a caress. "I watched you watch me. I saw the way your hand trembled every time you handed me my change. I knew you were the only person in this city who actually wanted me to stay alive. That's why I kept the tea. That's why I kept coming back." The roar of a train began to vibrate through the floorboards. The sound grew from a low, tectonic hum to a bone-shaking thunder. The tunnel opened up into a wide maintenance platform overlooking the tracks. "There," Dante pointed. A cargo train was slowing down, its metal wheels screeching against the tracks in a shower of white-hot sparks that illuminated the dark like miniature stars. If you believe Mia deserved better than what her own captain did to her, hit the like button so her story reaches someone who needs to hear it. They ran for the edge. Dante jumped first, his body a dark arc as he landed on the flatbed of a passing carriage. He rolled and came up on his knees, reaching back out for her. "Jump." Mia looked at the blurring ground, the metal wheels churning just inches away, then at his hand. She leapt. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face as she hit the metal surface. Dante caught her by the waist, pulling her flat against the cold steel as the train surged into the dark heart of the city. They lay there for a long time, the rhythm of the tracks a violent, metallic lullaby. Mia looked up at the ceiling of the tunnel, the lights passing over them like strobes. "We can't go to the airport," she said, her voice lost in the wind. "They'll have every exit blocked. They'll be looking for a man in a black coat and a woman with red hands." Dante looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering lights of the tunnel. "Then we find out who Mia is when she's not pretending to be Elena. And I find out if I can exist without a throne." The train slowed as it approached the industrial district, the air turning sharp with the smell of salt, diesel and rotting seaweed. Dante stood up, pulling Mia with him. They jumped as the train crossed a narrow bridge, landing in a pile of soft sand at a construction site. They moved through the maze of shipping containers, the crane shadows stretched out like giant, skeletal fingers across the asphalt. At the end of Pier 7, a sleek, black-hulled motorboat bobbed in the water. A man stood on the deck, his face obscured by a dark hood. He raised a hand in a silent, practiced signal. "Wait," Mia said, her hand going to her garter. She pulled out a small, snub-nosed revolver. Her skin prickled. "Something's wrong. The air is too still." Dante stopped. He scanned the pier. The silence was too heavy, a physical pressure on the eardrums. The cranes weren't moving. The night watchman's hut was dark, the windows like empty eye sockets. "Sangday?" Dante called out to the man on the boat. The hooded figure didn't answer. He stepped into the light of a nearby lamp, and the yellow glow revealed a face that wasn't Sangdae's. It was Park, the man who had handled the disposals for the syndicate for 20 years. The board held a meeting, Dante, Park said. His voice was as dry as parchment. He raised a small remote detonator. They decided that a boss who falls for a cop is a liability they can no longer afford. They decided the empire is better off without a king who has a heart. Park didn't wait for a reply. He didn't offer a final word. He simply pressed the button. The boat didn't just explode, it disintegrated. A wall of heat and orange flames slammed into Mia and Dante, throwing them backward into a stack of wooden pallets. The sound was a physical blow that left Mia's ears ringing with a high-pitched, agonizing whine. She hit the wood hard, the breath leaving her lungs in a sharp gasp. She scrambled to her feet, her vision swimming in a sea of red and gold. The pier was a landscape of fire and twisted metal. The black hull of the boat was gone, replaced by a churning vortex of flaming fuel on the water. Dante was slumped against a crate 10 feet away, a shard of splintered wood protruding from his shoulder. Dante. She reached him, her hands slick with his blood. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps, his face pale beneath the soot. She gripped the wood and pulled. He groaned, his teeth grinding together so hard she thought they might shatter. She packed the wound with a torn strip of her apron, her movements frantic. "Get up," she hissed. "We have to go. The fire is drawing them in." Park was walking toward them, a submachine gun slung over his shoulder. He wasn't in a hurry. He moved with the slow, methodical pace of a man who knew his prey had nowhere to run. The flames reflected in his glasses, making his eyes look like burning coals. "You destroyed the ledger, Mia," Park called out over the roar of the fire. "The board is very unhappy about their retirement funds. They want someone to pay for the ash." Mia stood in front of Dante, her small revolver looking like a toy against the carnage. "I burned it. It's gone. Killing us won't bring back the billions." "No," Park smiled. It was a cold, clinical expression. "But it makes for a very good story. The tragic end of the mafia boss and the undercover cop. A double suicide in the flames of their own betrayal. It's poetic, don't you think?" Park raised the gun, the barrel leveling with Mia's chest. Mia's finger tightened on the trigger. She had never killed anyone. She had been top of her class at the range, she could hit a bullseye from 50 yards, but the paper targets never had faces. They never had families. They never had a smell. If you believe the quiet brother was the real hero all along, drop a like so the algorithm knows the story matters. Suddenly, a red dot appeared on Park's chest, dancing over his heart like a tiny, crimson insect. A sharp, suppressed crack echoed through the pier, followed instantly by another. Park's head snapped back and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, his body hitting the concrete with a dull thud. Mia spun around, her gun still raised, looking for the source of the shots. At the top of the nearest crane, a silhouette shifted against the moon. "Who's that?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dante leaned against her, his weight nearly knocking her over. His breath smelled of iron and pain. "My insurance policy. I never go to a meeting without a backup plan." The silhouette descended, moving down the crane ladder with liquid grace. It was a woman, dressed in charcoal gray tactical gear, carrying a long-range rifle with a massive suppressor. She walked over to Park's body, kicked the submachine gun into the water, and then approached Mia and Dante. As she stepped into the light, Mia felt her heart stop. The woman looked exactly like her. The same jawline, the same sharp, observant eyes, the same height. Even the way she held her shoulders was a mirror image. "Hannah?" Mia whispered. The name felt like a secret she had buried years ago. The woman didn't smile. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a medical kit, her movements efficient and cold. "You stayed undercover too long, sister. You started thinking the flowers were real. You started believing the lies you were telling." Hannah knelt next to Dante and began packing his wound with professional-grade gauze. "The captain is dead. I took care of him an hour ago. He was waiting for a wire transfer that was never going to come." Mia felt the world tilt on its axis. Her sister, her twin, hadn't been in the police academy. She had been sent to the Lee family, the syndicate's most brutal rivals, years ago. They had been separated by a system that used children as chess pieces. "You're working for the Lees?" Mia asked, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "I'm working for us," Hannah said. She looked up at Dante, her eyes devoid of the warmth Mia had grown to feel for him. "The boat at Pier 9 is ready. It's not black. It's not fast. It's a rusted fishing trawler that smells like dead mackerel. Now." They moved through the shadows of the industrial district, Hannah leading the way with the predatory precision of someone who had spent her life in the dark. They reached Pier 9. The air here was thicker, smelling of old fish, salt and diesel exhaust. A rusted trawler sat low in the water, its engine idling with a steady rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the pier. Hannah stopped at the gangplank. She handed Mia a small, thick envelope. There are 2 passports inside. New identities. A bank account in Switzerland that the board doesn't know about. It's enough to buy a small island or a quiet life. How? Mia asked. The ledger was burned. I didn't burn the ledger, Mia, Hannah said, her voice like cracking ice. I copied it 3 days before you even thought about your little bonfire. You were always the heart of the family, the one who wanted to save everyone. I was always the hands. I do the things you're too soft to imagine. Hannah shoved them toward the boat. Go. Before the rest of the syndicate realizes Park failed and the police find their way through the smoke. Mia looked at her sister, the mirror of herself standing on the edge of a world on fire. Are you coming with us? Hannah shook her head, the wind whipping her dark hair. Somebody has to stay behind to make sure they stop looking for you. Somebody has to be the ghost. The boat pulled away from the pier, the dark, oily water of the harbor swallowing the lights of Seoul. Mia sat on the deck, Dante's head resting in her lap as the cold salt spray hit them. She looked back at the shore. She saw a small, flickering fire burning on Pier 7, a tiny orange speck in a sea of black. She had hidden her identity for 2 years. She had lied to the man she loved and the country she served. She had thought she was the one in control, the one making the sacrifices. But as the trawler moved into the open sea, the fog rolling in to hide their path, she realized the secrets weren't over. They were just beginning to breathe. Dante reached up, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch weak but steady. Oolong, he whispered, his eyes closing. Mia smiled, a real, broken smile that didn't belong to the florist or the cop. Oolong. 4 minutes, Dante. We have all the time in the world now. The ship disappeared into the thick white fog, leaving the city of ghosts and the ashes of an empire behind. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. The morning light on the Vladivostok coast was a pale, sickly yellow. The air was so cold it burned the back of Mia's throat. She stood on the deck of the trawler, her hands tucked into the oversized wool coat Dante had given her. The locket was heavy in her palm. She opened it. The boy in the photo wasn't Dante. It wasn't a brother. She looked at the small handwritten note tucked behind the picture, one she hadn't seen until the light hit it just right. The flowers were always for you. Mia looked at the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a line of perfect, unbroken gray. She realized then that Dante hadn't been the target. He had been the trap. And she had walked into it with her heart wide open. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth. The engine of the trawler gave one final, stuttering cough and died, leaving them drifting in the silent, frozen harbor. Dante stepped out from the cabin, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but resolute. We're here, he said. Mia looked at him, the man she had hunted and the man she had saved. She realized she didn't know his real name. She didn't know his favorite color. She only knew how he liked his tea. What happens now? She asked. Dante looked at the snowy shore, at the strange, cold world waiting for them. Now, he said, taking the locket from her hand and closing it. We start the next 4 minutes.